find your places, come on in, let's sing "'Tis So Sweet to Trust in Jesus." Sing it out on this old familiar song. "'Tis so sweet to trust in Jesus, just to take him at his word, just to rest upon his promise, just to know the saith the Lord. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust him, how I prove him o'er and o'er. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for grace to trust him more. Oh, how sweet to trust in Jesus, just to trust his cleansing love, just in simple faith to plunge me beneath the healing cleansing blood. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust him, how I prove him o'er and o'er. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for grace to trust him more. 'Tis sweet to trust in Jesus, just from sin and self to cease, just from Jesus simply taking life and rest and joy and peace. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust him, how I prove him o'er and o'er. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for grace to trust him more. And I'm so glad I learned to trust him, precious Jesus, Savior, friend. And I know that thou art with me, will be with me to the end. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust him, how I prove him o'er and o'er. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for grace to trust him more. We haven't done this song in a while. It's going to sound really familiar. But it says, turn your eyes upon Jesus. He's the one that we love, we adore, and we worship tonight. So join me in singing, Turn Your Eyes. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. Turn your eyes to the hillside, where justice and mercy embrace. There the Son of God gave his life for us, and our measureless debt was erased. Jesus, to you we lift our eyes. Jesus, our glory and our prize. We adore you, behold you
All right, I'm going to let you be seated just for a second, okay? We're getting ready to dismiss, but I want to give you a couple announcements first, a couple things I want to make you aware of, want you to remember. First couple are going to be schedule-oriented, so a couple schedule-oriented announcements. Normal services this Sunday, next Sunday, but then July the 28th, we will have a luncheon and an afternoon service. Again, that afternoon service will be our quarterly business meeting, okay? And so make sure you plan on being here. We will be going over some building project stuff as we move forward into that. And then let me give you a couple, kind of jump into next month and give you a couple announcemements, things we'll be announcing Sunday for the first time, but you'll hear them first here. August the 8th is a faith and family night at the Flying Squirrels game. And so we'll be getting tickets. You'll be able to sign up for those through Church Center. We'll be going together as a church, and so we'll get a big section of 50 or 60 seats that are all together, okay? So you'll be able to sign up beginning here in the next couple days whenever I put it on Church Center. You'll be able to sign up for that and go ahead and pay through that and all that stuff, okay? I think the tickets are $12 is what I think they are, and they're field level seats on the first base side, and so that'll be August the 8th. And then August 17th, we've got an event planned, and many of you know Chris McAviney. I'm letting Chris McAviney and Susanna kind of head this up. They've done this type activity before, but the activity theme is called Lego My Ego, and it's a Saturday morning activity that runs for about 3 hours on Saturday morning, and it's a Lego-themed activity. So the kids will be doing different challenges with Legos, and some of it will be free build, some of it will be building kits. There'll be the bigger Legos for the younger kids and all sorts of stuff like that. So that'll be August the 17th. So go ahead and put that on your calendar, and I wanted to make you aware of those things. Again, calendar notifications. One other thing I wanted to let you know. So we had talked about giving our workers for the Olympians and Gopher Buddies a little bit of break throughout the summer, so we're not going to be continuing that program throughout the summer, but I know that it would be difficult for a lot of our kids just to sit in here every Wednesday night throughout the summer. So what we're going to do, the wardens are going to take tonight and kind of facilitate an evening with our kids. And so I would just ask you to do this. If you plan on being here throughout the summer, especially if you've got kids in that age group, okay, would you consider just signing up for 1 week throughout the summer? We've really only got about 7 more weeks, or maybe 8 before we start Olympians back and Gopher Buddies back. So would you just consider taking a week and saying, hey, I'll come, I'll organize some kind of game, or at least just keep the kids from running too amok for the 40 minutes that we're in here during the adult Bible study, okay? So think about that. Let me know if you can help next week, the week after, whatever, for kind of overseeing the kids for a few minutes while we do our Bible study. So let's pray, and we'll go ahead and dismiss both our teens and our kids tonight, okay? Father, we love you. Lord, I pray that tonight as we open up your word, that you would speak to our hearts. Lord, as we lay the groundwork for this study in the book of Esther, that Father, it would be applicable to our lives, and we can learn things from it that we can put in place even in our own lives. Father, I pray that you would be with those who are away from us, be with those who are sick, be with those who are having health issues, Lord. I pray you bring them back to us safely. Father, give us a good night. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, kids, teens, you're going to go with the wardens. Teens, you are dismissed. All right. All right. Well, how was your week? Have you had a good week thus far? Be praying for Wayne and Danielle out in South Hill, really close to where one of their house are. Do what? 10 feet. That's what I said, really close. That's really close. That big fire that was out there in South Hill happened, and of course they have a lot of damage to their house, and so just be praying they can get all that worked out. Let me give you a couple other updates and then prayer requests as we jump into this Bible study here in a minute. Would you pray for Bruce Marston? I didn't ask him if I could share this, but he had a little bit of a work accident today. He's fine. He's okay, but he's not with us tonight. And so be praying for Bruce if you would. And then thank you for praying. Miss Melanie asked me to tell the church thank you for praying. Of course, she had her cardiac ablation yesterday, and I thought, that's a heart procedure, I thought it was going to be outpatient, so to speak, and that she was going to go home within a couple hours of the procedure. And she called me this morning and said, I just got discharged out of the hospital. They kept me all night. And I was like, oh, no, what happened? So she was okay. It's just the procedure was late in the day, and they wanted to watch her throughout the night. So they kept Miss Melanie throughout the night. And so she just got home. She told me, she said, Pastor, I don't know if I'll make it. She said, I didn't sleep a wink all night long. And I said, well, being in the hospital, I don't doubt that. I don't know why, when you go there to get better, they refuse to let you sleep. I mean, if you've ever been in the hospital, you know, just about the time that you feel like you're going to doze off, they come in and they say, we want to check your heart rate. And then you go to doze off again, and they say, hey, with your blood pressure cuff's not on correctly. And so about every half hour, they come in and check on something, it seems. But so she said she didn't sleep a wink last night, so they probably weren't going to make it tonight. So, but she did want to pass on the thanks from her for all of those who prayed, and that she's hoping this doctor has high hopes that this is going to take care of a lot of her AFib issues that she was having. So would you be praying for Bruce? Thanks for praying for Miss Melanie. Be praying for the Floyds and that situation. They get that remedied. Okay, are you ready to dive into the book of Esther tonight? Yeah, me too. I've been looking forward to this. I've listened to the book of Esther about 4 times, and I've read through the book twice. And so I'm really excited about us being able to dive in and just study it through here in the next 6 weeks or so. I'm really anticipating that we can get through it in the next about 6 weeks, but we'll see how that goes. As is our normal custom, we're going to read through the entire chapter that we're going to be. I will say that it's not too long of a chapter, but it's one of the longer in the book. Most of them are 12, 14, 16 verses. This one's 22, and chapter 2 is 23. So chapter 1 and 2 are a little longer, but then they get much shorter after that. Matter of fact, when you get all the way into chapter 10, I think it's only about 4 verses long. 3 verses long. So when you get into chapter 10, it's only 3 verses long. So we'll dive in tonight. Let's just read through. You'll have to follow along in your copy of the Bible because I didn't put them on the screen for tonight. So let's read through chapter 1, okay? Now it came to pass in the days of, anybody want to guess how you pronounce that? Yeah, Ahasuerus. This is Ahasuerus which reigned from India even unto Ethiopia, over 127 provinces. That in those days when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan, the palace, that ought to be a familiar name. We'll talk about that more in just a minute. In the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast unto all his princes and his servants, the power of Persia and Media, the nobles and princes of the provinces being before him. When he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty many days, even 180 days. And when these days were expired, the king made a feast unto all the people that were present in Shushan the palace, both unto great and small, 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace, where were white, green, and blue hangings, fastened with cords of fine linen, and purple to silver rings and pillars of marble. The beds were of gold and silver, upon a pavement of red and blue and white and black marble. They gave them drink in vessels of gold, the vessels being diverse one from another. and royal wine in abundance, according to the state of the king. And the drinking was according to the law, none did compel, for so the king had appointed to all the officers of his house that they should do according to every man's pleasure. Also, Vashti, the queen, made a feast for the women in the royal house, which belonged to King Ahasuerus. Verse 10, on the seventh day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, and Abagtha, Zathar, and Carcass, the 7 chamberlains that served in the presence of Ahasuerus the king, to bring Vashti, the queen, before the king with the crown royal, to show the people and the princes her beauty, for she was fair to look on. But the queen Vashti refused to come at the king's commandment by his chamberlains. Therefore was the king very wroth, and his anger burned in him. Then the king said to the wise men, which knew the times, for so was the king's manner toward all that knew the law and judgment. And the next unto him was Carshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, which saw the king's face, and which sat the first in the kingdom. What shall we do unto the queen Vashti according to the law, because she had not performed the commandment of the king Ahasuerus by the chamberlains? Verse 16, and Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Vashti the queen had not done wrong to the king only, but also to all the princes and to all the people that are in the provinces of the king Ahasuerus. For this deed of the queen shall come abroad unto all women, so that they shall despise their husbands in their eyes when it shall be reported. The king Ahasuerus commanded Vashti the queen to be brought in before him, but she came not. Likewise shall the ladies of Persia and Media say this day unto all the king's princes which have heard of the deed of the queen, thus shall there arise too much contempt and wrath. Verse 19, hang tight with me, we've only got 4 more verses. If it please the king, let there go a royal command from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, that it be not altered, that Vashti come no more before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal estate unto another that is better than she. And when the king's decree which he shall make shall be published throughout all the empire, for it is great, all the wives shall give to their husbands honor, both to great and small. And the saying pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. For he sent letters into all the king's provinces, into every province, according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language, that every man should bear rule in his own house, that it should be published according to the language of every people. Okay, thanks for hanging in with me. I know that was a lot. I know that we got through the end of that chapter, and we're all like, whoo, I don't know. I think I got some of that. Well, let's go back. And let's just start, and we'll kind of just work our way through the narrative. I'll tell you what this is. This really is not the story of Esther. This is just setting the groundwork for how did Esther get to be where Esther was. That's the only reason that chapter 1 is in this narrative at all, is because it sets the groundwork for how does Esther come to be in a place of prominence, okay? So chapter 1 is really just setting the context, but it's going to tell us a lot about the cultural context and the societal norms of Persia. So let's dive in here. Let's go back to verse 1. Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, this is Ahasuerus, which reigned from India even unto Ethiopia, over 120 provinces. Verse 2, that in those days when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan, the palace. Let me say to start with, there's a lot of carryover, and you'll see that on a slide here in just a minute. There's a lot of carryover into other books of the Old Testament. Anybody want to take a guess of another book that may be semi-contemporary, let's say within 50 years, one way or the other, of Esther? Want to guess? Okay, the chronology of the books of your Bible will give you some hints and some indicators. Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. So both Ezra and Nehemiah were written close to the same time frame, within a few years, one way or the other, as what Esther was written. But also you've got Daniel and you've got Haggai, which also have some cross references. I think I put a couple in here. The words of Nehemiah, the son of Hachaliah, and it came to pass in the month Chislev, in the 20th year, as I was in Shushan the palace. Okay, now, Shushan the palace is the same palace, so there's some cross-reference here that we see King Ahasuerus in. Also, in Daniel chapter 8, Daniel says, I saw a vision, it came to pass when I saw that I was in Shushan, in that palace. And so you've kind of got some cross-reference, and Shushan is a place that is, although you may not have been familiar with it right off the bat, kind of has its tendrils in other books of the Bible. Let's kind of go to this statement here in verse 1. It says, Ahasuerus, who reigned from India even unto Ethiopia. Okay, so this is the Medo-Persian Empire, okay? This is the full extent of the Medo-Persian Empire. And if you see in red right there, that word is Susa. That is the Persian word that obviously the Bible is written in Hebrew. And so Hebrew borrowed that word Susa. And sometimes that Susa, even in ancient Medo-Persia, was called Susan. And you can actually hear Shushan and Susan. So in Hebrew, it just kind of got tweaked a little bit and became Shushan. And so that is the capital of the Medo-Persian Empire. Now, I wanted to give you this for a little bit of context, okay? I'm a little bit of you guys know I'm a little bit of a historical buff and nerd, but you see this, and you might not right away appreciate how vast the empire was. You look at it, and you go, okay, well, you know, I'm not super familiar with world geography, so I don't really know. Well, let me give you something that I hope will cause you to think through how big and vast this empire was. Okay, this red dot is where Susa was, or Shushan, the palace. Now, we're going to go back and forth a couple times, and I want to just draw your attention to how vast and large this empire was. Okay, so remember this right there? That takes us right back to Susa. Now, let's look again at the yellow, and let's look over here. The empire extended down through Iran. It covered Afghanistan, Pakistan, much of eastern India, all the way up to Tajikistan. I don't know how you pronounce that. What is it? Okay, we'll go with that. Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan. So you look at, it's all these stands over here, but a lot of that whole area moving into India was all part of it. Okay, now let's look back again. Now, also parts of Saudi Arabia, all of Israel, Egypt, but what we would consider as modern-day Africa, Sudan, Egypt, Libya, Chad, okay, possibly even up into Tunisia. Whoops, wrong way. All right, but then it's not just all the way to India, and it's not just down into Egypt, but look, as we're getting into Europe, okay, you've got Greece, Serbia, Bulgaria, Romania, okay, Turkey, all of what is modern-day Turkey, all the way up to Georgia. And so I say all that to say this, it was a huge, huge empire. The verse here says that there were 127 provinces. Now, it says later on that Judea, is what it calls that area, was one of the provinces. So suffice to say this, that every time the Medo-Persian Empire, every time they would go and they would overthrow an area, a country, that country would become a province. Now, we looked at it. Our countries are obviously much different today, but you would imagine that is a lot of battle and war. A lot of conquest is happening here. All throughout that area, you may be familiar if you're into world history at all. King Ahasuerus was, even during the writing of the book of Esther, or during the transpiring of events of the book of Esther, King Ahasuerus was planning his siege on Thermopylae, which is a well-known conflict and a well-known world history battle. Let me give you just a couple things that are unique about Esther before we really dive in any farther, now that we have a little bit of a context of where it took place and some other biblical insight. Number one thing that's interesting, Esther is the only book in the Bible that doesn't use the name God. I don't know if you ever thought about that as you read through it. It's not in there. Now, certainly we see an underlying principle how God's people and the chosen people, but the name for God isn't in the book of Esther. I'll give you another, I don't know if you would call it an odd fact or an interesting fact, but another one is that we don't know who wrote the book of Esther. We don't have any idea. I mean, we don't know whether it was, could have been Mordecai, could have been Esther, could have been somebody else down the line. We just don't know who wrote the book of Esther, and so it's a very interesting, very unique book. Now let's do this. We're gonna just kind of be introduced to a few of the main characters in chapter 1, and we'll learn more about them as we go. But let's talk about the king. Ahasuerus is the king, and you see I put in parentheses there Xerxes. Many Bible scholars, and you may not be one of them, and that's okay. Many Bible scholars believe that as we talk here about King Ahasuerus, that another name for him would have been King Xerxes. As a matter of fact, even in my Bible, it says in here, the events of this book cover a 10-year portion of the reign of Xerxes the first. Ahasuerus is the Hebrew form of his name, equivalent to the Persian name and the Greek Xerxes. So many Bible scholars, I'll be reluctant to say most, but many Bible scholars believe that Xerxes and Ahasuerus are one and the same. And we're introduced to Ahasuerus in chapter 1. The next person really we meet in chapter 1 is his bride. Vashti is her name, and she is introduced to us in chapter 1. And then you've got another group of people here. The seven, call them cabinet members if you want. But we're introduced to these seven who are ultimately going to mandate and kind of have the ear of the king in chapter 1. And while that will continue a little bit throughout the book, it's mostly in chapter 1. Let me read to you in Ezra chapter 7. You don't have to turn there. Ezra chapter 7, this is a letter of Artaxerxes. And it says this: "For as much as thou art sent of the king and of his 7 counselors to inquire concerning Judah and Jerusalem." It would seem there that King Ahasuerus had 7 people who were part of his cabinet that really, when it came down to it, not only did they help him and they advised him, but they also gave him authority because they were regents over certain areas. And so when he included them in decisions and then they went off, they would make sure that in their 7 regions, and one of those regents may rule over 20 or 30 different provinces, other nations. And so they would make sure that his will was kind of carried out. Okay, so we've kind of got some context. I've kind of divided up the chapter here into 3 sections. Section number 1 is just his empire, and we've talked some about that. And I want to take a moment and just say that this empire was not just vast geographically, but it was vast in its reserves of riches, gold and silver. You can see some of that as we read chapter 1. But also, it was they were so wealthy. If you remember back to Daniel, do you remember when the king? I don't remember. I guess it was Belshazzar. In Daniel, remember when he had a dream and he saw the statue standing there, and the head was of gold, and the bust, the torso was of silver. So it's like you have you have the head, that was the Babylonian Empire. Well, then the Babylonians were overthrown by the Medo-Persians. So then you've got this torso that Daniel says is like unto your kingdom, but equally as vast and has riches, right? So this Medo-Persian Empire is the torso in King Belshazzar's dream. So we kind of see King Ahasuerus in the Medo-Persian Empire. Let's look here at the next. Again, I've kind of got out of order on some of this. We saw cross references in Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah, Haggai. But I want to look at what I've entitled the royal debauchery. They say, I don't remember what the quote is. Maybe you remember the quote. Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I think it's something along those lines. The truth is that King Ahasuerus, King Xerxes, had found himself in a situation where he was the most powerful man in the world. I mean, really, when you look at the known world at the time, he had anything and everything he wanted. He was wealthy beyond imagination, and his power was almost without limit. And oftentimes, power corrupts. And so you begin to look at what was happening. In the 3rd year of his reign, it said he made a feast unto all his princes, we're in verse 3, princes and servants, the power of Persia and Media, the nobles and princes of the provinces being before him. Okay, so let's pause here and let's try to just wrap our head around what he's doing. So 3 years into his reign. By the way, I didn't tell you this, but King Ahasuerus received his reign from his father, King Darius the First. And so King Xerxes, or King Ahasuerus, was the son of King Darius the First. And so just 3 years into his rule, he's probably a fairly young man. And it's just not a good idea to give a really young man a lot of money, because young guys don't spend money well normally. I'll tell you what, if I just woke up one morning and there was just an exorbitant amount of money in my bank account, I'd immediately be thinking, green top, here I come. It's like the question wouldn't be, babe, do you want a boat? It'd be, babe, what kind of boat do you want? If I just woke up to all sorts of money, I would immediately be thinking, man, look at all the stuff I could have, right? I'd be thinking about Bass Pro, be thinking about green top. Well, King Ahasuerus found himself in that situation. He was handed a kingdom, and that kingdom came with power and prestige and wealth. So just a few years into his kingdom, he says, hey, let's have a big party. And it was a huge party. It says this in verse 3. He made a feast for his princes and his servants, the power of Persia and Media, the nobles and princes of the provinces. Now, there were 127 provinces. Each province was ruled by sometimes the aristocracy of that previous empire swore fealty to King Xerxes and said, hey, we'll just follow your law. And so he says, okay, I'll let you continue to be the king of this place. Other times, they're stubborn and they say, we're going to fight to the death. And King Xerxes King Darius, they'd kill them all, and they would bring in a new regent, somebody who's going to rule in that area. But either way, you've got 127 provinces. This list of people here who are going to be participating in this feast would have certainly numbered into the hundreds, probably into the thousands of people that are going to be invited to this feast. Now, if you look at what it looked like, it says this, he showed, verse 4, the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty many days, even 104 score. So 180 days. So for 6 months, he invited all these princes and nobles and regents and all these people out. And he said, we're just going to live it up. I want to show you everything that the Persian Empire has to offer. And no doubt, it was opulent, to say the least. Well, at the end of the 180 days, look in verse 5, it says, when these days were expired, the king made a feast unto all the people that were present in Shushan the palace, both unto great and small. Now let me pause here. When the verse says both unto great and small, now we've expanded our number. Not only have we talked about the princes and the nobles, okay, because those would have been the great, right? Those would have been the people who had authority, but he says, unto everyone who was in the palace, great and small. Everybody was invited. Everybody who was in Shushan was invited. Now, what had happened after Nebuchadnezzar conquers Judah in 586, and then Medo-Persia conquers Babylon, and so takes control of all their countries that they had originally conquered. Cyrus of Persia issued an edict in about 50 years after they were conquered. So they were conquered in 586. In 538, Cyrus of Persia said, hey, you Jews can go back to your homeland. If you promise to live in peace, you can go back and live in Jerusalem. Well, what do you think happened? Some did, some didn't. Some said, yes, let's go back to our homeland. Let's go back to the land that God promises. Others said, hey, you know what? It's not that bad here in Babylon or in Persia now. It's not that bad here. We're well taken care of. We're respected. Why go back to Jerusalem and have to struggle for a living when we've kind of planted ourselves here and we're kind of happy? And so a lot of them stayed. And so a lot of the Jews had stayed. And so when we find out here in the next few chapters about Mordecai and about Esther, those are Jews who opted not, under the Edict of Cyrus, they opted not to go back to their homeland. So you had all these people who were in Shushan. Now, it takes a couple verses here and talks about all the decor, but look in verse 7. And they gave them drink in vessels of gold, the vessels being diverse one from another, and royal wine in abundance, according to the state of the king. And the drinking was according to the law, or this law, none did compel. So, what does that mean? Well, honestly, as they move into this 7 days of feasting, we can tell from verse 9 that Vashti, the queen, made a feast for the women in the royal house. So probably all these men, all these rulers, all these people, and then Queen Vashti said, hey, well, I'm going to have all their wives come over here. And they kind of had a couple different feasts going on. And the Bible makes it pretty clear that after 7 days, there's a couple remarks that make us think this, but it talked about the wine being in abundance, and that later on the king, his heart was merry with wine. There are a couple things that lead us to believe that this party, this feast was characterized by drunkenness and just excessiveness. And so there's a lot of that going on. And generally, whenever you have a lot of that going on, and especially when you have people who are used to being in power, it is often joined with a lot of other things. Probably a lot of immorality taking place. So this is what we see happening for 7 days. It says the drinking was according to the law, none did compel. You might ask, what does that mean? Well, it was common practice when you went to the feast of a king and a king invited you to a feast, that you basically just did whatever he did. So if he wasn't eating, you weren't eating. If he wasn't drinking, you weren't drinking. If he wasn't, standing, you weren't standing. You just did exactly what the king did. Now, they were, if you went to a feast, if someone went to a feast of a king who was, as the Bible would say it, given to much wine, who drank a lot of those people in there drank a lot, because when the king lifted his glass, they all lifted their glass. And whatever the king did, they did. But it was interesting here. The king said, listen, this is 7 days worth of feasting. Nobody's required to do anything. If they want to drink, they can drink. If they don't want to drink, they don't have to drink. So it was just an interesting dynamic here in the Medo-Persian Empire. Now, let's get into what happened with Queen Vashti. Let's introduce her to the story, because she leaves the story at the end of chapter 1. So Queen Vashti comes on the scene, and she's having this feast. She's doing probably what she was supposed to as the king's wife. She was supposed to be doing. Well, in verse 10, it says, on the 7th day when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded his chamberlains to go get her and to bring her to show off her beauty. There are a lot of different ideas about what this could mean. There's actually a historical Jewish tradition that says that he had required her and asked her to come in amongst all of these princes and nobles and all these men, and asked her to come in a state of immodesty. We don't know. The Bible doesn't say that. It's certainly a possibility. Whatever it is, and whether she just didn't want to be showed off, or whether he had asked her to do something that would have been inappropriate, we don't know. And by the way, Queen Vashti is, we shouldn't attribute to her some sort of moral standard that the Bible doesn't attribute to her. I've heard people say, oh, well, she was too moral to do what he had asked her to do. We don't know that. She could have just been a contentious, difficult person. I mean, we don't know. The Bible doesn't specifically say. But either way, what we do know, what is relevant to the story, is the king said, hey, I want you to come in here. And she essentially said, hey, I'm not going to do it. And what's interesting here is you see, as we get through the book of Esther, you see two different ends of the spectrum on really women who were in places of authority and in places of power. And it went two different ways for them. One of them came in and she said, look, I'm not going to follow your law. And we're going to see, we've read that she was deposed, and she was said, hey, fine, you don't get to be here anymore. I'm taking everything that came from you. You're a peasant now. You have nothing to offer. And then you've got somebody else who kind of really played fast and loose with the rules a little bit as well, and yet was honored because of it. And so Vashti says, hey, listen, I'm not coming out. I'm not doing what you want to do. And so the king immediately brings these men to him, and he says, okay, what are we going to do about this? Isn't that interesting that instead of just saying, hey, I'm going to go talk to my wife, he brings in all these wise men and says, what are we going to do about this? Isn't that a weird way to handle a marital conflict? So he brings these guys, and haven't you found out when you ask people opinions that everybody's got an opinion? I was going to tell you what opinions are like, but you might know. Everybody's got their own opinion. I had a friend that always used to say, lest you not be sure what I was going to say and think I was going to say something I wasn't. I had a friend that used to say, everybody's got an opinion. Opinions are like armpits. Everybody's got one, and they all stink, But everybody had an opinion, and one of the chamberlains says, well, here's what I think you need to do. Memucan says this. Here's what you need to do, king. If you let this just go on, there are a couple problems here. Okay? Understand the Persian Empire. Okay? Understand Middle Eastern culture, which, by the way, if you looked back, let's go back a little bit. Boop, 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 boop. Okay, do you see how far, Susa, where they were, is from current-day Saudi Arabia? Like, it's really close. And you know how often women are, and especially were, let's say 50 or 100 years ago, treated in Saudi Arabia? They really were, for all practical purposes, in that part of the country, ladies were just property. You're just going to do what I tell you to do. You don't have any say in the matter. And so this was a big deal. For any woman to disobey a man, her husband, was a big problem in that culture. And not only that, she had failed to honor, she had kind of put herself up against a man, but a man that was her husband, and a man that was her husband and the king. I mean, she kind of, hey, Vashti, 3 strikes and you're out, is kind of how they looked at it. And Memucan says this, she hasn't just done wrong to the king, she's affected every of the provinces that you're over. Because now everybody's going to say, well, I don't have to obey the king, because the king's wife doesn't obey the king. I don't have to obey my husband because Vashti didn't obey her husband, right? So they were kind of throwing the culture on their ear, on its ear, and saying, hey, we can't allow this to happen because it'll change all of the culture. And so they were adamant that they weren't going to let it happen, and they were going to make an example out of Vashti. And so they do that. They depose her, and they banish her. But then Memucan comes up with an idea. So it says this. You have a little bit of a section here where he's saying, here's all the things that could happen. Let's just kind of peruse through it again. This deed shall come abroad unto all women. They'll all hear it. They'll all hear it reported. Verse 18, likewise shall the ladies of Persia and Media say this day unto all the king's princes, thus shall there arise too much contempt. And he says this in the end of verse 19, let the king give her royal estate unto another that is better than she. And I think the king here, King Ahasuerus, immediately thought, maybe that's not a bad idea. You know what? Maybe it's not a bad idea for me to just get another wife. And Memucan says this, I'll just get one that's better than the one I've already got. Now, I want to pause for a minute here in talking about God's plan for us and our importance of understanding contentment in what you have. Now, I would argue here that for King Ahasuerus, he ended up with a woman who was a godly woman, and but God's plan for us is contentment with what we have. So often we get ourselves in trouble when we think, you know what, the grass is probably greener on the other side. You know what, my spouse doesn't understand me, but there's this other person that will. That's not God's plan. Somebody, I saw a video the other day that somebody sent me that said, how do I know if I married the person that God wanted me to marry? I think was the title of the little video. And the question was, how do I know if I married the person that God wanted me to marry? And then it flashes to the video, and it goes, it's too late. You've already married her, or you already married him. So this is move forward. Please God, serve him, live for him. It was like eloquent, but it was a funny video. Because I was kind of waiting, like, well, what are they going to say here? And it was like, you've already done it. You're already married, so just move on. There's no point in going back and going, what if? What about? So the king was enticed to sin, to put away his wife, and to find a better one. And ultimately, he jumps at the opportunity to do that. They send out a decree, and they're basically telling, they're so adamant about it because they don't want to lose their cultural context. They sent out a decree that was published throughout all the empire that all the wives shall give to their husbands honor, both to great and small. And the saying pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. Now, let me pause here. Well, let me read verse 22. He sent the letters into every province, into the king's province, into every province according to the writing, and to every people after their language, that every man should bear rule in his own house, that it should be published according to the language of every people. So he says this, like, we've made Vashti an example. Now we're putting out a public decree for every place that is underneath our authority, that it's important that wives honor their husbands and that every man should bear rule in his own house. Now, let me make a couple remarks about this that are interesting. Number one, if we look at it, that really is a biblical approach, that a wife should honor her husband, that a husband should rule well in his own house, right? That's a biblical approach. But in the same way that although you can legislate people to do a certain thing, you can't change their heart. This type of far-reaching commandment sent down from the king doesn't change the hearts of people. If a wife hates and despises her husband because he doesn't treat her well, then while she may honor him publicly, she doesn't honor him in the way that really matters. And if a husband isn't treating his wife well, is he deserving of the honor that a wife is required or commanded to give? And so you can't command those things from your high tower and expect that everyone do all that it is that you should do. So it's so interesting here. As I read through the end of chapter 1, I found it so interesting that the admonition that was given is really, in all reality, how God wants a home to function. I ought love my wife like Christ loves the church. My wife ought to respect me. We ought to have mutual submission to one another. Her being underneath my authority as the head of the house, but we have mutual submission and love for one another. And that's how God desires all that to work. And so that was a little bit like what they're saying is really kind of how God created a home to function anyway. But it's not to be mandated that way from a king. It's to come from a heart of putting the other first. And so really an interesting concept as we get to the end of chapter 2. Now, what's going to happen here at the end of chapter 1, as we get into chapter 2, here's what's going to happen. Chapter 2 is a really interesting chapter because we have the discovery of Esther. We have Esther comes on the scene, and she actually comes on the scene as Hadassah. That's her Hebrew name. And she comes on the scene, and she's going to make a ploy or a play at being the next queen. And so tonight is really laying the groundwork for what's getting ready to happen under this lady who really is going to change the course of history for the Jewish people. So a lot of interesting things happen in chapter 2. So we'll wrap up tonight. Again, I just really wanted to lay the groundwork for what's getting ready to happen for the remainder of the summer here. And I was doing some reading, and one of the commentators called Esther, and I think not being lighthearted with Scripture here, but a fairy tale story. I mean, it really kind of is. I mean, when you think about how they write, princess stories now and fairy tale endings and all that, I mean, Esther really is that. She was a nobody. She was a commoner. She had an opportunity to become the queen, and she does that. But not only does she just become, the princess figure, but then she has the opportunity to save her people from total annihilation. And so she does that. And so Esther is such a unique story. And when we get through it here in the next 6 or 7 weeks, I trust that you have a newfound appreciation for the book and really will enjoy going through it together as much as I have enjoyed beginning to study. So let's pray together, and then we'll dismiss. Father, we love you. And Lord, as we look in the book of Esther, we are reminded how quickly things can get out of whack when we don't do things your way. How quickly we can be led astray when we let people speak into our life. And we're even going to talk about that in chapter 2 and chapter 3. How quickly we can go astray when we allow people who are not spiritual to speak into our life. We find ourselves following advice and ideas that won't please you. Lord, I pray that as we go through this study week in, week out, that it would just be enjoyable, that we would look forward to it all throughout the week, and that we would gain in knowledge and understanding of your word. Father, we love you. I pray you would give us a good week, bring us back safely on Sunday so we can have a great day together. Father, we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. Hey, we love you. Lord bless you. You're dismissed. If you got any questions about upcoming activities, feel free to let me know. I know I just mentioned a few of them in passing tonight.